Have you ever stood before the Colosseum and wondered what truly built the greatness of an empire? The shimmering marble tiles, the majestic statues of Apollo, the thunderous cheers of thousands. But history has layers. Beneath the triumph, under the golden palaces and roaring crowds, lies a world few dare to speak of, the world of male concubines. Unlike the grand tales of emperors and generals, this is the story of boys forgotten by time. Their names were never etched in marble. No poet sang of their bravery. They existed only as shadows, ghosts beneath the pride of a so-called civilized empire. These young men, known as concubines in Latin, weren't just common slaves. They were selected for their beauty, intelligence, and their ability to please. They came from all corners of the empire, sons of desperate families selling their children to survive, or prisoners of war from Gaul, Britannia, and Egypt. According to historian Tacitus, owning a male concubine was a status symbol in Roman high society, the equivalent of owning a luxury sports car today. But what's truly terrifying isn't the brutality, it's how normal it all was. In Roman society, selling a 14-year-old boy into concubinage was just business. A recent social media post revealed among millions of viewers of Roman history content, only 3% knew male concubines existed, which begs the question, are we deliberately ignoring the darker corners of history? A study by Stanford researcher Jenny Vo, Femi, found eerie parallels between the Roman concubine trade and modern human trafficking. Both prey on the vulnerable, both use psychological control, and both reduce humans to commodities. On the island of Delos, Rome's largest slave trading hub, 10,000 slaves were sold daily, including hundreds of beautiful young boys. The numbers paint a painful truth: Rome wasn't just the empire of Caesars and gladiators. It was a machine that crushed human dignity on a massive scale. The story we're about to unfold isn't just a relic of the past, it's a mirror of today. Because according to the International Labor Organization, over 50 million people live in modern slavery today. In the following chapters, you'll journey through the real lives of Rome's male concubines, from capture to brutal training to their darkest days in Roman villas. You'll learn they weren't just silent victims. They had dreams, they resisted, and they deserved to be remembered. Imagine you're a 15-year-old boy in a quiet Mediterranean village. Your day starts like any other. You're herding goats on a hill, your sister's laughter echoing from home. But within hours, everything changes. A Roman warship docks. Soldiers sweep the coast. The manhunt begins. This wasn't a fantasy. It was the fate of thousands of boys during Rome's golden age, snatched not for crimes, but for simply living in the wrong place. The selection process was chillingly systematic. According to the Oxyrhynchus Papyri, slave traders had strict criteria: age 12-18, physically fit, no defects, and ideally beautiful by Roman standards. That meant light skin, curly hair, and bright eyes, features considered ideal in Rome. The prime hunting grounds, newly conquered lands, Gauls, modern France, Britannia, UK, and Germania. These raids were often carried out by pirates or slave traders, with silent approval from Roman officials. Pliny the Elder recorded that a handsome boy could fetch 100,000 sesterces, the cost of a sprawling estate. Not all were kidnapped. Some were sold by their own families in times of famine. For the poorest, selling a son meant survival. Thus formed a twisted, voluntary market where despair turned into profit. The journey to Rome was a nightmare. Shackled, packed in filthy ships, with little food and contaminated water. Seneca wrote that 30% died before arrival. Those who survived were spiritually dead, their language, identity, and freedom stripped. Today's trafficking isn't far removed. A 2024 report from the Global Anti-Trafficking Alliance found that 73% of victims are recruited from poor or war-torn regions. Just like in Rome, the transport, still secretive, still lethal. Once in Rome, the boys were taken to slave markets near the Forum Romanum. There, they were stripped naked, inspected like livestock, and forced to perform to prove their worth. Roman poet Martial described it as living statues with eyes full of fear. Buying a concubine wasn't just commerce, it was theater. Rome's elite came not just to buy, but to flaunt their wealth and refined taste. Owning a beautiful boy was status, and the worst part, nobody questioned it. It was all just business. The silence around it was its own form of violence. Boys didn't become concubines overnight. They were trained for months in facilities the Romans called ludus, not schools, but psychological factories built to erase the self and mold boys into compliant gifts. A typical ludus was walled, guarded, isolated. Boys lived in bare rooms, no belongings, just a bed and bowl. Their day ran from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. with minimal rest. Training had 3 phases: break, rebuild, perfect. The first, breaking, meant erasing all traces of their old lives. Speaking their native language was forbidden. Mentioning family earned beatings. Individuality, punished. Quintilian, a Roman educator, wrote the goal was to create blank slates. The second phase, rebuilding, taught them Latin, reading, poetry, philosophy, not for education but to turn them into intellectual toys. They also learned massage, wine mixing, and unmentionable arts of pleasure. The final phase, perfecting, taught them to act, smile when in pain, thank their master for humiliation, read moods, react accordingly. They became actors in the cruelest play imaginable, their own lives. Training mixed reward and punishment. Quick learners got better food, nicer clothes, softer beds. The defiant were beaten, starved, or locked in dark cells. Cicero once wrote, "The best slaves forget they were ever anything else." Modern psychology knows this pattern. It's Stockholm Syndrome. Total control, alternating abuse and comfort, creates dependency. Ludus were ancient labs for trauma, but not all boys surrendered. Some resisted, learned secret signs to communicate, even tried escaping. Seneca tells of a boy named Marcus who ran away 3 times. He was caught, branded fugitivus on his forehead. Brainwashing, it's still happening. Today's traffickers use identical methods: isolation, identity erasure, dependency creation. A trauma psychologist said, "What Rome did 2,000 years ago is exactly what modern traffickers do today." By the end of training, these boys weren't themselves anymore. But in quiet moments, some still remembered home, family, freedom. Those memories, flickers of the past, became their only strength. Step into a typical Roman villa, and you'd be mesmerized. Marble pillars, murals so vivid they looked alive, fountains bubbling in lush gardens. But for a male concubine, all that beauty was just the backdrop to a brutal stage, one he was forced to perform on every single day. Their day began before dawn. They had to bathe, groom, and dress, never by choice. Their clothing was selected by their master, often thin togas or ornamental wraps, chosen not for comfort but for display. Petronius wrote that some masters even left daily notes on how they wanted their concubines to look. But their role in the Roman household went far beyond the bedroom. These boys were status symbols, intellectual companions, and silent advisors. During banquets, they stood at their master's side, ready to pour wine, recite poetry, or discuss philosophy. But they had to do it all with a perfect smile, no matter how hollow they felt inside. The relationship between a master and his concubine was defined by absolute imbalance. A master could be charming in the morning, monstrous at night. Pliny the Younger, often seen as a kind man, once wrote about disciplining a concubine for merely glancing at a forbidden scroll. This unpredictability created a constant state of psychological tension. What's even more unsettling is how Roman society justified it all. Philosophers like Aristotle claimed that some people were born to be slaves. Their suffering was natural. Even Seneca, a so-called moral thinker, owned hundreds of slaves, many of them young boys. The contradiction was staggering. They spoke of virtue, but practiced cruelty. Inside these villas, concubines lived in cramped furniture, less rooms, often next to the master's bedroom, ready to be summoned at any hour. They owned nothing, they had no privacy. Some, if lucky, became tutors or scribes. Most were just living decorations, ornaments of flesh. Psychologically, they had to play roles just to survive. Some found small comfort in quiet resistance, secret glances, whispered memories, silent acts of defiance. Roman poet Martial once described 2 concubines speaking with their eyes during a banquet, a haunting image of human connection in a world of oppression, and the mental toll was staggering. Today we'd call it complex PTSD, nightmares, anxiety, emotional detachment. One papyrus from Oxyrhynchus recorded a slave's words, "Each night I dream I fly home, but I always wake in chains." The cruelest cut of all, love. Many concubines eventually developed real feelings for their masters, not because of trauma bonding, but because it was the only way to survive emotionally. They turned pain into affection, humiliation into gratitude. Their hearts rewired themselves just to cope. Rome turned them into trophies. The more beautiful boys a man owned, the more powerful he appeared. It became a twisted arms race of flesh. A mural in Pompeii even shows a banquet surrounded by dozens of male concubines, still, silent, eyes empty, like human statues. Sound familiar? It should. Even today, in some corners of society, people are still treated as status symbols. Trafficking, coercive relationships, and the use of human beings as social capital still happen, just under new names. But in every day of hell, concubines still found moments to reclaim their humanity. They etched their names into walls, hid small trinkets from home, shared stories by candlelight, tiny acts of defiance. And those small acts were everything. In a society obsessed with youth and beauty, nothing was more brutal than aging, especially if you were a male concubine. If their youth was a gilded cage, then old age was a cold, locked door with no key. Most concubines began to lose favor around the age of 25. In Rome, beauty meant youth. The first wrinkle, a strand of gray hair, or simply the loss of that boyish innocence, was enough to mark them as replaceable. Pliny the Elder wrote, "An aging concubine is like a wilted flower. No one wants to see it." What happened next? There were three fates, none kind. The lucky few were reassigned, becoming house managers, scribes, or tutors. But that was rare. Only the educated ones with strong ties to their masters earned that privilege. Seneca called this rare mercy, and he meant it. Most were sold off or gifted to lesser families. Their market value dropped to a fraction of what it once was. Tacitus noted that an unexpired concubine could be sold for 1/10 the price of a younger one. Some ended up doing back-breaking labor on farms or working in brothels, used until there was nothing left to take. And then there were the discarded, released with no money, no skills, and no identity. Many became beggars in the streets of Rome, living in filth and anonymity. Others ended their own lives, unable to face the fall from luxury to ruin. Roman satirist Juvenal described them as ghosts on cobblestones, haunted by golden memories. Psychologically, the damage was profound. After years of total dependency, they'd lost the ability to function on their own. They forgot how to make choices, how to exist without being told what to be. Modern psychology calls this learned helplessness, a condition where freedom feels like another kind of prison. But there were rare exceptions, sparks of resistance even in old age. Some concubines secretly taught themselves to read, to calculate, to barter. Petronius wrote about one named Trimalchio, who saved every coin he could and eventually became a wealthy merchant. Stories like his were celebrated, but they were the exception, not the rule. Roman society didn't just ignore old concubines, it despised them. They became walking reminders of faded beauty, of pleasure gone stale. Cicero once said, "Nothing is more pitiful than someone who was once beautiful, but now is ugly." That cruelty was built into the culture. Some found solace in faith. Early Christian communities, radical for their time, preached equality and human dignity. Augustine wrote about meeting a former concubine who had become a devout missionary, helping others escape lives like the one he had endured. The fate of aging concubines revealed a deeper failure of Roman society, its total lack of social support. Unlike other civilizations, Rome had no safety net, no pensions, no protection for the old, the injured, or the discarded. Once your body failed, you were no longer useful. You were invisible. And disturbingly, that echoes in today's world. Across industries that rely on youth and appearance, modeling, entertainment, even parts of hospitality, aging often means vanishing. But at least today, there are support systems. There are choices. Rome gave its concubines neither. Their suffering wasn't just personal, it was systemic. They were used, erased, and forgotten. But a few, a rare few, managed to rewrite their ending. Walk through any museum today and you'll see countless Roman artifacts, coins stamped with emperors' faces, statues of gods frozen in glory, mosaics that shimmer like sunlight on water. But if you know where to look, you'll find something else, faint, fragile traces of those Rome tried to erase. The most haunting of these whispers come from graffiti. In Pompeii, buried under ash for centuries, archaeologists uncovered walls scratched not by noblemen, but by those with no voice. In the Villa of Mysteries, dozens of etched lines are believed to come from male concubines. One reads, "Ego sum Marcus, sed non sum liber." I am Marcus, but I am not free. Another, "Somnio de mater me." I dream of my mother. These weren't official records. These were confessions, scratched with broken pottery, nails, even teeth, into stone that was never meant to listen. Papyrus scrolls from Egypt tell us even more. In one, a boy writes to a friend, "I've learned to smile while my heart cracks, but at night I cry alone." The Greek is clumsy, the handwriting unsure, but the pain crystal clear. Learning to write for them wasn't just skill, it was survival, a secret weapon against erasure. In Herculaneum, frescoes hidden in private quarters show a different story than the glamorous public murals. One depicts a boy seated alone, staring out a window toward the sea, his eyes full of longing. No gold, no gods, just grief. And sometimes miraculously, there were testaments of hope. In rare last wills of Roman elites, some masters granted freedom to their concubines. One reads, "I free Gaius, for he served me not only with his body, but with his heart." But even these came with strings, conditions, obligations, or a requirement to remain close. Modern archaeology is adding new chapters to their story. DNA testing on skeletal remains reveals many came from as far as Gaul, Britannia, even Scandinavia. Bone analysis shows shifts in diet. Meager village food replaced with rich Roman banquets, often lacking in nutrients they once knew. Their bodies tell a story their mouths were never allowed to. And literature, most authors ignored them, or worse, objectified them. But a few, like Petronius in Satyricon, offered glimpses of their interior lives. His character Giton, a concubine, wasn't just a plaything. He was afraid, thoughtful, torn. He had a soul. The poet Catullus hinted at tenderness too, describing moments of genuine intimacy. But even in those lines, power imbalance loomed large. Desire doesn't erase domination. One of the strangest discoveries, cursed tablets, thin sheets of metal where Romans inscribed hexes. Some of these were written by concubines. "I curse Marcus Flavius, who stole my childhood. May the gods make him feel my silence." They weren't allowed to speak out, so they whispered to the underworld. At Cambridge, researchers reconstructed a ludus training facility. What they found was chilling windowless cells, tiny courtyards, total surveillance. These weren't homes. They were behavioral laboratories, designed to break spirits, not shape minds. Yet even in silence, even in stone, these boys left echoes. Their legacy lives on, not just in ruins but in language. Many modern European terms for boy, or companion, or even property, trace back to words used for male concubines. Our systems of beauty, power, and class, they still carry Roman fingerprints. And in today's digital world, a movement is rising to remember them. The hashtag #FendForgottenVoices now holds thousands of posts. One viral message read, "They had no names in history books, but they lived, they loved, they suffered, and they deserve to be remembered." As we turn from the ruins of the Roman Empire to the world we live in today, one question echoes louder than marble walls. Have we really evolved, or just changed costumes? According to the International Labor Organization's 2022 report, more than 50 million people are currently living in modern slavery. That includes 28 million in forced labor and 22 million in forced marriages. Even more staggering, 17% are children. Boys and girls with faces not so different from those concubines taken in Rome 2,000 years ago. Jenny Vo Flemmi, the Stanford researcher who studied ancient slavery, mapped the similarities between Rome's concubine networks and today's trafficking rings. Both target the vulnerable, children from poor families, refugees fleeing war zones, people without safety nets. Both operate through organized channels. Rome had Delos. Today, we have the internet, and while technology has changed, tactics haven't. Modern traffickers still isolate victims, break down identities, create dependency. The same reward and punishment structure used in Roman ludus schools is now found in trafficking shelters worldwide. One trauma psychologist said, "Read a Roman training manual and a modern trafficking case file back to back. The methods are horrifyingly alike." Even worse, some of the platforms fueling this crisis today are global. Victims are advertised on dark web forums, coordinated through messaging apps, shipped under fake IDs, sold not in markets but in hotel rooms, factories, and private homes. Ironically, the same tools that traffickers use, algorithms, behavioral profiling, are now being used to stop them. Femi developed AI models to detect suspicious patterns in digital conversations, inspired by how archaeologists mapped ancient slave trade routes through artifact clustering. But there's one core difference between Rome and now. Back then, slavery was legal, public, normal. Today it's illegal, yet far more hidden. We pretend it's over, but it's just underground. Look closely. You'll see it in undocumented workers forced into labor without pay, in domestic help, who are never allowed to leave the house, in arranged marriages where girls are traded like currency, in entire industries where survival depends on silence. And disturbingly, just like Rome, we've found ways to justify it. Where the Romans used philosophy, some are born to serve. We use economics. They choose this work. We say sex work, domestic help, supply chain complexity. All elegant ways to mask brutal exploitation. But there's hope. Unlike Rome, we now have activists, laws, organizations, and most importantly, awareness. Movements like Pay and Modern Slavery have gone viral. Survivors are speaking out, and people are finally beginning to ask, who makes the clothes I wear? Who picked the fruit I eat? Who paid the real price for my convenience? Fami once said, "We used to ask where the marble came from. Now we ask where the blood does." And when we look back at Rome, not just the emperors and the glory, but the pain beneath, we see something vital. The past is not dead, it's coded into us, unless we unlearn it. Now that you know, the question isn't what happened, it's what will you do? The story of Rome's male concubines isn't just a history lesson, it's a warning, a mirror. And, if we choose, a call to action. Because unlike them, you have power. They were stripped of voice, choice, and freedom. You have all three. So what now? First, become a conscious consumer. Know where your products come from. Apps like How Good or Boycott let you scan barcodes and see if a company's supply chain is linked to forced labor. A single shirt, a chocolate bar, a phone battery. Every choice is a vote, for dignity or for exploitation. Second, learn the signs of trafficking. The Polaris Project offers a list. Someone who can't move freely, has no ID, is always accompanied, shows fear of authority, or appears to be controlled. If you're a teacher, doctor, social worker, you might be the first and only person who notices. Don't ignore the signs. Third, speak up, loudly. Use your voice where others cannot. Don't let injustice be drowned in silence. Post, share, join the conversation. The hashtag #FadModernSlavery isn't a trend, it's a resistance. Because one post, shared with purpose, can reach millions. Change happens when awareness becomes movement. And remember, even the smallest voices can shake empires. Iqbal Masih, a boy from Pakistan, escaped bonded labor at age 10. By 12, he had helped free thousands of children. He was murdered, but his voice still echoes around the world. Malala Yousafzai, once targeted for wanting an education, became a Nobel Peace Prize winner before turning 18. She reminded us, one child, one teacher, one pen can change the world. Sumali Mam, sold into sex slavery as a child in Cambodia, now runs organizations that have rescued thousands of girls. Survivors don't just heal, they lead. There are organizations on the front lines right now. Anti-Slavery International, Polaris Project, International Justice Mission, Blue Dragon Foundation, Vietnam, Pacific Links Foundation. They don't just need money. They need voices, volunteers, creators, builders, people like you. If you're a business owner, clean up your supply chain. If you're a teacher, bring these stories into your classroom. If you're a content creator, don't just entertain, illuminate. Art can change hearts, Stories can open eyes, truth can break chains. Films like 12 Years a Slave shifted the global narrative on historical slavery. Documentaries like I Am Jane Doe exposed the trafficking crisis online. What could your voice do? And no, it won't be easy. This isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. It's staying angry long after the video ends. It's refusing to look away, even when the rest of the world does. Because silence is not neutral. It's permission, it's complicity. Rome's concubines couldn't tell their stories, but you just heard them, and that means you're now a keeper of their memory. So the question is, will you let them fade again? Or will you speak for those who never got the chance? The final chapter hasn't been written yet. You hold the pen, pick it up, share this story with Fev. Remember the forgotten and flay end modern slavery. Change a habit, donate, volunteer, educate, refuse to be silent. Because if history teaches us anything, it's this: when we ignore injustice, we help it grow. But when we stand up, no matter how small our voice, we become the justice we've been waiting for.